Dr. Joao Fong, can you take over?
Yes, thank you, Jean and Kyusher. I'll be moderating this next session. So in this next session, we have a distinguished panel of speakers lined up today who will share on the applications of the ProFamy model. Each speaker will present for about 12 minutes, and we will have a combined Q&A at the very end. May I now call upon our first speaker, who is Samuel Vizina from Statistics Canada. Samuel, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Bear with me while I share my screen. Okay. And it's a go. Can you see this? Probably. All right, so in my presentation, I will show you projection results for Canada using ProFamy. So I'm Samuel Vizina, as I say, and I'm a senior analyst at Statistics Canada. So here's the plan of my presentation. So typically I'll say a few words about the context that is specific to Canada with regards to its population dynamics. And then I will quickly overview a couple of concepts we used in our projections for Canada. I will go over some other methodological aspects with regards to base population, parameters, projection assumptions. Then I'll show you the main results. First on population and households projections, and then on projected living arrangements of older adults. And finally, I'll conclude with a few words on limitation and coming improvements for the next cycle, projection cycle. Okay, so Canada right now is experiencing the third demographic transition because on one hand, we have very high immigration intake, and on the other hand, we have low fertility level of the Canadian-born population, and therefore the population dynamic is characterized by greater ethno-cultural diversity. Meanwhile, life expectancy is increasing, and so with the large cohort of baby boomers reaching the age of 65, the senior population is growing at a much faster pace than the overall population. That said, like it was said earlier, women represent the majority of seniors, and these women are different from senior men, especially with regards to living arrangements. They tend to live alone more than men, and also they're more likely to live in collective dwellings. All this to say that this population dynamics stresses the relevance and the need to generate projections of households and living arrangements for Canada. And right now, it's a well-known gap at Statistics Canada, and that's why we really wanted to generate a first cycle of households projections using ProFamy. Currently, there are two projections program at Statistics Canada. So there's the standard multi-state model that projects the population by age, sex, and region. And this program right now is transitioning from the traditional deterministic approach to towards a more probabilistic approach. This model actually was very useful to feed the ProFamy projections results that I'm going to show you in the next slides. At the Center for Demography at StatScan, we also have Demosym, which is a very powerful micro-simulation model that projects the population not only by age and sex and regions, but by many more characteristics such as education, labor force participation, immigration status, race, language, etc. So it's widely used by the federal government for policy making and policy planning. And right now in Demosym, there is a projection module to derive households projections, but it's very basic and it was developed for indigenous housing programs planning, because in Canada we have an important indigenous population. Anyway, so it's very basic. It uses headship rate. So we know it's flawed, it's not perfect, and it's actually not well suited to do in-depth analysis of household dynamics and living arrangements as ProFamy does. So in a nutshell, there's room for improvement, and that's precisely why we're interested in using ProFamy. So on our way, to get that first cycle of projections, we encountered a different data caveats that forced some other methodological decision. So for example, in Canada, we have very few information on people living in collective dwellings. And so we had to make some adjustments and strong assumptions on that. Also, we decided not to distinguish formal unions, so marriages, to common law unions, because it simplified the calculations of the marital status transitions, but it was also because it's coherent and consistent with the current Canadian nuptiality trends, where right now common law unions are now widespread among all strata of the Canadian population, and so it was easier for us not to distinguish these two. So for this projection, as I said, we used ProFamy, and we wanted really to take the opportunity of using the power of the model. And so for the base population, we used the public use micro data file of the 2001 National Household Survey. So this hierarchical file contains a representative sample of the Canadian population and households. And as you probably know, there are two main types of parameters that are needed in ProFamy. So first, the standard schedules. So in that first attempt, we decided we would try as much as possible to use open sources data for replicability purposes. So for example, we use the human mortality database, but we also use the general social survey to assess the sex-specific marital status transition. Second, the summary measures that we plugged in ProFamy are identical, as I said earlier, to the fertility, mortality, migration assumptions of the reference scenario of the official Canadian population projections for Canada between 2013 and 2063. And we also kept constant most of the other summary measures at their 2011 level, so as observed in the base population. So in a nutshell, here I prepared this table that gives you more precisely the content of the reference scenario. So as I said, we plugged in the number of the official StatScan projections. So a male expectancy here, for example, starting at 79.4 in 2011 and rising up slowly throughout the projection period up to 87.3 in 2061. For women, same thing, so 83.7 up to 89.0 in 2061. And then a constant total fertility rate of 1.67 throughout the projection period, an immigration rate of 7.5 per thousand, immigration rate at 1.7 per thousand. And again, we kept constant other summary measures such as the general rates of union formation and dissolutions, and also mean age at birth. So we also developed additional projection scenarios for sensitivity analysis. So in the first column here in black, you have the same summary measure as the previous slide, so that I listed. But then on the column in green and red, you have the summary measures and the assumptions for the low growth and the high growth scenarios, which actually combines exactly the low and high assumptions on fertility, mortality, migrations of StatScan official projections. We also designed, so those are the two last columns of the table, so in blue and yellow, a small family scenario and a large family scenario to test the sensitivity of union formation and dissolution rates on households projections. So these rates are increased or decreased by 20% compared to baseline. So let's now have a look at the results. So first, we see here that the reference scenario is really well projecting successfully the growth trend of the Canadian population. And it's also successful in the sense that we were able to replicate the actual official population projections. So you can see here that the population of Canada is projected to grow up to 47.9 million in 2061 under the reference scenario. And then we have the low and high growth scenario. And then the small family and large family scenarios are directly superimposed over the low and high growth scenario. And that was expected because actually the same assumptions were made there for the population projections. So here we have, so the total Canadian population will increase, but the age structure will get older. And so here we have the projected, the proportion of 65 plus, and it's projected to accelerate over the next 2 decades. And so it should reach in 2061 a quarter of the population. So that's a lot. And you have again the scenarios that are superimposed over. So we have a range of between 25% and 29%. So that's the proportion of that's projected by the other scenarios. So the scenario converges when we look at the population, but when we look at the household projections, then we have a broader range using the 2 other scenarios. So here we see that under the reference scenario, the average household size should more or less stay constant over the projection period, but slightly decrease and reach 2.3 members in 2061. And you see that the small and large family scenario is fall outside the range that's drawn by the low and high scenario, and that was expected because obviously more it's expected because like having more divorces and less marriages, for example, in the small family scenario will lead to a smaller average household size. So despite the slightly decreasing average size, the total number of households is likely to grow. So we project here an increase of starting to less than 15 million in 2011 and reaching 20.8 million in 2061. So this time we see that the small and large family scenario fall inside the range of, but that's expected too, because in brief, we can explain that by the fact that the small family scenario, we have more divorce, less marriages, so it increases the likelihood of living alone and not in couple, which leads, of course, to having more households. So that's why the blue line, for example, is above the green line. Now, looking here at the living arrangements of the Canadian seniors, we see that under the reference scenario, we project, for example, that 30% here, the reference scenario. So we see that the proportion of seniors living alone is projected to increase, going from 30% up to 32% under the reference scenarios. And we see that this distribution of seniors by living arrangements is very sensitive to a change in marriage and divorces, because indeed you can see here that the small family and the large family scenarios project the highest and the lowest proportion of seniors living alone. So for seniors, it's not so much the demographic components that drives their living arrangements, but the marriages and divorces rates. In conclusion, for the future, we plan on updating these projections. So with most recent data, and we know there's room for improvement. For example, as a first attempt, like we decided we would go national, but obviously these projections mask substantial regional differences. So we will take the opportunity. We know that this feature is already implemented in ProFamy, so we'll definitely in the next cycle go regionally. And also we plan to use the internal use dataset of the census. And so doing so, I think that the projection would certainly have would improve the quality of information on the collective dwellings. And so doing so, I think that the projection would certainly have greater impact on policymakers, since the issue right now about aging and nursing home and long-term care is really burning. So we really need to get the collective dwellings in the projections. So I stop here. I think my time is up. So your comments and questions are more than welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. Your timing is perfect. Let's move on to our second speaker, who is Chu Shifeng from the National University of Singapore. Chu, please.
Sorry, Chelsea, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear? Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Joel, for the moderation. And today my presentation is about applying the method of ProFamy at the subnational level. I cannot agree with Professor Hayashi more that the household projection is more valuable and useful for the subnational level, particularly in the urban and the county level, because many substantial plannings for business and welfare are actually conducted at the subnational level. So by presenting this, I'm presenting some of the good progress of ProFamy in the recent years. As Professor Zheng has argued in the keynote speech, household is experiencing substantial transformations. And this is a very important challenge for us because most of the consumptions are made by the unit of a household. Particularly those energies such as water, electricity, and gases. The smaller household size in this sense is not a bless. In the morning, as Dr. Bravo has shown to us, actually the smaller household size is less cost effective in terms of energy consumption. So this will not be a bless for our sustainable future. Professor Zheng has done recent research to make two types of projections. One is based on the population, and another one is based on household. And then the case is chosen as Hebei province of China. As you can see, if we foresee the future consumption of energy, the population-based projection will have a very severe under bias. So it may not be correct. So this call us to do a very timely projection of energy based on household rather than based on individuals. The ProFamy method is now a very important method in the field. As Professor Zheng has introduced, ProFamy is a micro-simulation method, which simulates the household living arrangement based on individuals grouped by age, sex, race, marital status, and number of co-residing children. It is also cohort component method, in which the projection actually is based on the cohort that produce the future changes. Tomorrow, we will have 2 sessions of trainings. I believe those of you who are interested in ProFamy will learn more about this method. I would like to say here that the ProFamy method has been extensively validated in America, in China, and many other countries. And it has been applied in many interesting projects, such as the CO2 emission in the United States, in the automobile and housing industry in the United States and Australia, and for fertility analysis and retirement analysis in China, and also for the housing and living arrangement projection in Germany, Brazil, and Mexico. And now today, I'm going to show the application of ProFamy at the county level. The reason is since 1990s, researchers and policymakers pay more attention to the subnational levels because household and living arrangement projection at subnational level are often more useful because most of those planning activities happened in the subnational level, such as distributing the funds, allocating resources, planning the infrastructure and facilities, and also production planning for the household commodities and service, or decisions on either expanding or reducing the local business. These are, in these fields, planning at the township level, county level, and city level make much sense. And therefore, a ProFamy need to be expanded to the subnational level. However, as we all see, subnational level data tend to be very limited. So there's a methodological challenge to apply ProFamy. Professor Zheng Yi has proposed this methodology, which has been shown to be very successful. That is, for the subnational level projections, we could adopt the national level schedules and use the county or city level summary measures. And this showed to be a very successful strategy because the national level standard schedules are quite available from national data. And then for the summary measures, we could rely on the local agency and the bureaus, analysts, to set up a reasonable prediction for the local summary measures, such as TFR or life expectancies. This reduced a lot of work to get the standard schedules at the local level, and also practically be a very robust method. I would like to illustrate the feasibility and robustness of this methodology. We focus on Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, and this is the largest metropolitan planning organization of the United States, and it has 6 counties. Working with SCAG, we actually got the local summary data, and in combination with the national level schedule, we project the household and population of SCAG at the county level. Before showing the projection, we firstly did a validation. Namely, we used the data from 2000 to project the outcome in 2010. And then we compare the projected outcome of 2010 with the real observation at 2010. In this case, we can see the difference. And by checking those differences, we can see how valid ProFamy could be in the county level. As you can see from the major indicators in this table in terms of population size, number of household, average household size, number of one-person household, a number of 2 or 3 or 4-person household, a number of married couple household. ProFamy produced very satisfactory result. The difference between the projected outcome and the real observation are very, very minor. And then I'm going to illustrate what ProFamy could do for SCAG at the county level. We can see ProFamy can project the population size at the 6 counties and also the number of households. As you can see, Los Angeles is the largest county in SCAG. It will increase in terms of population by about 18%. However, as Professor Zheng just argued, the growth of household is usually much faster than the growth of population. For Los Angeles, you can see in terms of number of households, the growth is actually higher. It is 22%. And ProFamy, in contrast to headship rate, ProFamy has a great advantage to project household size and different household types. As you can see, this is our projection of the SCAG area in terms of household size and also in terms of different household types. And they are very policy implicated because different household size and different household types imply different kind of welfare recipients and therefore could be very useful to the local agencies. And this is a ProFamy projection of the different population by race, which is a major concern of the local policy agency. We actually successfully project different race dynamics from 2010 to 2040 of the 6 counties. And then also, ProFamy could project different household type if you are interested. In this illustration, you can see the one-person household, which is a very important subject mentioned by Professor Jin Yang. You can see it actually increased very fast in the SCAG area, and then particularly among the white people. So this is a projection by household type, but also by different race groups. Therefore, the local policy agency have a better idea about where those one-person household would come from. Not only on that, ProFamy could successfully project elderly living arrangement. Because of population aging, this is a very important policy topic. As you can see, ProFamy projects different type of elderly living arrangement. As you can see, there could be solo living, or beyond the solo living, we can differentiate by different marital status, whether they live alone because of never being married, or because of widowed or divorced. Also, we could project different type of co-residence with children, and these are very useful policy intelligence for the local agencies. And this is the last illustration. We are focusing on the solo living elders, who are often targeted as vulnerable groups who deserve the public help. And we analyze those trends of those solo living older people in Southern California, and also analyze them by different gender and marital status, so that policymakers could understand the group better, and therefore could get a more specified picture of their elderly care needs. And in conclusion, we think like by applying ProFamy in the subnational level to Southern California, we show that ProFamy is valid method at the county level. And more than that, I think unlike the traditional hardship rate method, ProFamy is advantaged by providing much more detailed and useful projection for the local policy agencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Qiushi. Perfect timing as well. So let's keep up this momentum. Let's move on to our third speaker, who is Terza Aida from the University of Campinas. Terza, over to you, please.
Hello, can you hear me? I will present for Terza.
Yes.
I will share my screen here.
Terza, it doesn't seem to be coming up.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah, we can hear you, but the screen doesn't seem to be coming up. Yeah, maybe you try again.
Yes.
Try clicking it again. Yeah.
It seems like it's blocked to me.
It's blocked to you. Okay. Zhu, can you try to see this? Is this your screen?
Yes, can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. So let me start here. Hello everyone. My name is Gustavo Brussi. I'm from University of Campinas, Brazil. Also Terza Aida from Campinas University in Brazil. And firstly, we want to thank the International Conference organizations. We are glad to presenting here. And today we're gonna talk about our first results on household and living arrangements projections for Brazil and 5 great regions. So Professor Terza and I, we are part of a collaboration project called International Studies on Household and Residential Energy Demands Projections. And we are working towards a national household projections for Brazil and its 5 great regions. Considering that Brazil doesn't have an official practice of household projection, neither in national or subnational level. So we are contributing to this practice here in Brazil with ProFamy software. So the objective of this presentation will be showing the exploratory analysis focusing on the base population data, the definition of each of the model design parameters, standard schedules of this age-specific demographic rates, the general rates of marriage and union, and setting some summary measures for the national household projection for Brazil, highlighting the difference between the great regions in Brazil. Also, we will present and test 3 COVID scenarios using São Paulo state as base population to understand the impact of the pandemic on household projections. So firstly, I want to illustrate how great the difference between the Brazilian states are. So here, Brazil is known to have one of the greatest social inequalities in the world. And we can see here in the graphs that we can divide Brazil in 2, which the states located in North and Northeast, they have lower human development index, also higher Gini index and higher informality rate, but with low life expectancy at birth and also low average per capita income, compared to the states located in the south, southeast, and midwest of Brazil, who have a higher human development index, lower Gini index and informality rate, and also higher life expectancy at birth and average per capita income. So the population in Brazil is concentrated in the coast and mainly in the states of São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. So this difference also can lead to different demographic dynamics, which we're gonna see in the next slides, and also lead to important impacts to design public policies and informed decision making. So using George Bravo research on United Nations, we can compare Brazil as a whole country with other countries in terms of household type distribution. And we can see that Brazil has a lower percentage of people living alone households, and also have higher extended household percentage. But the main population lives in couple with children households. And if we disaggregate this result into great regions in Brazil, we see that the population is, the household is concentrated in southeast, northeast, and the south, and mainly in 2 and 3 persons households, but with a considering number of 4 and 5 persons households. But this distribution change if we look to another regions like North and Midwest. And this difference also appears when we calculate the average household size, where the North and Northeast region has a higher household average size compared to the rest of the country. One reason of that is the time when people leave the parental home. So here we calculate the proportion of people living with the parents by great regions in 2010 for female and male, and we see that obviously when in childhood most people live with their parents, but huge difference appears by great regions. This gray curve, it's southeast, so we have a big difference when living with people living parents, and also it affects the marital transitions, marital status transitions. Here we can see the transitions between never married to married. Also, we have a big difference between the great regions in Brazil for male and female. Also to the transitions married to divorced and divorced to marriage. But we couldn't find expressive difference according to the transitions married to widow for female. For mortality analysis, we calculate the age mortality specific rates, and again, we can see north and northeast with higher mortality rates. You can see in infant mortality and adult mortality very different patterns compared to the rest of Brazil. Also for female mortality, and it appears also when doing a fertility analysis. So the north and northeast of Brazil has higher and younger curves compared to the rest of Brazil. That leads to a higher total fertility rate. So putting all this information to the base population, we can compare the direct count from the census data, comparing to the model count with ProFamy software, and we can calculate the difference between those estimates. And the result is that the ProFamy software has calculated very low errors. Every error was lower than 1%, and for 3 and more generations household, 2 generations household, and 1 generations household. So for the grand total, the error is lower than 0.05%. Very good results. So our first result is that Brazilian inner difference can be seen in terms of fertility, mortality, marital status, and also household types distribution among the 5 great regions: South, Southeast, Midwest, Northeast, and North. So this difference can also lead to different household and population scenarios, which may have an important impact to the household projections. Also, obviously, our hypothesis is that the different demographic regimes will lead to different household projections when we do it for the whole country. However, we cannot disregard the COVID pandemic, which has been impacting all the demographic components since 2020. And the COVID pandemic has impacted differently the 5 great regions in Brazil due to difference in financial resources, health system distribution, and also the politicians' measures. So what we did, we create 3 COVID scenarios using the São Paulo state, this one, to test how we can include the COVID pandemic scenarios into our projection for the whole country. So the first scenario will consider what will happen if there is no COVID-19 pandemic in 2000 and 2001. So the trends in São Paulo state, that it was the drop in fertility, change in time in markers of different phase of life course, transformation in gender relationship, and decrease in marriage and increase in divorces, and also increase in consensual unions and remarriage, will all of this keep constant in time. The second scenario will assume quick return to 2019 demographic regime. So here we have the life expectancy at birth. So we have this drop in life expectancy, but as soon as the COVID scenario stops, we return to 2019 regime and keep the trend we're observing in São Paulo. Also happened in TFR. We have the drop because of the COVID, and we have a quick return in this second scenario. We call this short impact scenario. And we have the third scenario, that is the long impact scenario, that after the drop in life expectancy and the TFR, we have at least 10 or 20 years to recover to 2019 trends in São Paulo state. So we use the ProFamy software in the summary measures to create those scenarios for COVID pandemic. And the result was that the COVID-19 pandemic will contribute to a drop in average household size. So here the blue line is the short impact of COVID and the red line is the long impact COVID. And considering the long-term consequence of the COVID, the average household size will be 2.2% lower, and one person's household, it will be 12% higher. Also, the COVID pandemic will have an important impact on 3 persons and 4+ persons household that will be lower than 10% in a longer impact COVID scenario and 3.1% for 4+ persons households. So our final remarks, we want to say that ProFamy is a powerful tool to explore and create different scenarios, especially in the moments of crisis we are living now in COVID-19 pandemic. And it's also important to population consumption, housing, environment issues, and also to design public policies. So our next step, we will be finishing the calculation of standard schedules and summary measures for the national household and living arrangements projections for Brazil and 5 great regions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Gustavo, for sharing your perspectives. Let's move on to our 4th speaker. Our 4th speaker is Milad Bagi from the Bu Ali Sina University. Milad, may I turn to you, please?
Okay, hello everyone. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Yeah. Let me share my screen. Do you have my slides?
Yes, it has come up. Yeah, you have 12 minutes, please. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hello everyone. Good morning. I'm Milad Bagi from Bu Ali Sina University. Is about using ProFamy model for household projection in Iran. This is a collaborative work with my colleague, Professor Muhammad Jalal Abbasi Shawazi from University of Tehran. Well, I want to start my presentation with this question that why the future of household is important in Iran. Iran is a Muslim country and family has a high social status, and more than 90% of households are family household in Iran. And moreover, the family is monitored by their religious or prohibited. Well, this have led to a nuclear household having a majority during the past 4 decades. The more than 60% of households are nuclear household, but as you see, their share is declining after 2004. However, Iran has experienced major transformation in other aspects of the household. For example, the number of households saw a 6-fold increase, and the average household size has decreased, and headship rates by age and sex have changed. We also observe some changes in various family aspects. Well, TFR has dropped to below replacement level. The mean age at first marriage has risen for both sexes. And another point, important point, is generational differences in family values. The younger cohort have more positive attitudes towards subjects such as cohabitation, abortion, divorce, sex outside of marriage, etc. Well, accordingly, the share of solo households, single parent, and couples without children are on the rise. Therefore, it seems that change in household structure have begun, and we can see an upward trends after 2000 for one-person married couple without children and single parent. We also have a downward trend for extended household. The core differences are also significant. These two figures show these differences. At the left, we have the average household size in Iran by age and cohort. So as you can see, the highest average size reached by younger cohort is declining. They also start their household by lower average. At the right, you can see the cohort and show that the share of one-person household is very high among the youngest cohort. In addition to these changes, these transformations, the age structure of Iran is changing, and it is expected to Iran have an aging population in 2050. So the question is, what is the future of family and household structure in Iran, and what we should expect? For this purpose, we used a ProFamy model, ProFamy software for projection of household in Iran. For the base year data, we used 2% census microdata in 2016, as well as the results of surveys and working papers that have been done in Iran. And for the future trends, we used the UN medium growth scenario projections. Well, our projection was based on 3 scenarios, the low, medium, and growth scenarios, but here we have only the results based on the medium scenario, because its results was more similar with the observed data. Well, as you know, one of the most important steps in projection is the evaluating the results. Well, one of these there are some criteria for that, and one of them is comparison of projected result with historical and observed values. So for this purpose, we first made a projection based on 2011 census data. Then we compared the projected result with 2016 census. In almost all indicators, the differences were less than 1%. So we made the final projection based on 2016 census data. Here you can see the population pyramid projected by ProFamy and census data in 2016, and the results of index of dissimilarity show that these pyramids are almost identical, and it shows the accuracy of the ProFamy model. Here we have the projection result, the number of households in Iran. We expect to have an increase from 24 million in 2016 to 35 million at the end of the projection. Average household size, also you can see we have a decline in this in average household size. This is show the past and the future of average household size. After a sharp declining from 1991 to 2016, we expect this decline to continue, but with a slower speed. So that the average household size will reach less than 3 people per household in the next 2 decades. We also expect more changes in household structure. As you can see, the share of nuclear household will reach less than 50% by 2036, while these households have always had an absolute majority in the past decades, as I showed in the previous slides. On the other hand, the single parent household, a married couple without children, and one-person household will increase, and it means that the household the household structure in Iran will change in the future. Along with the population aging, the share of households with elderly heads will also increase, and their share will reach about 1/3 of total population by 2051. But important point is living arrangement of elderly people. We expect to have an increase in all types of living arrangement among elderly people. Well, more elderly people live alone, about 6% of all people aged 65 and over in 2051. It means about 600,000 elderly people should live alone in the future in 2051. That should be supported by the government and social security systems. But most elderly people will live with their spouse and children. This shows the importance of a relationship between children and their parents in the cultural context of Iranian society, because the family still have a high status, high social status in society. Well, as a result, it seems the change in household and family structure in Iran is inevitable, and the young cohort will be influential. As writer mentioned, the cohort can be the source of change, but a problem of projection model is true about all projection, not only ProFamy. The problem is their inability to take into account the value and attitudes of the individual, especially for young women, young people. Young people attitudes can speed up or slow down the change of household structure in Iran. This phenomenon is called cohort replacement, demographic metabolism, or family household momentum. All of these refer to a similar process, the process of replacement of individuals who have different characteristics. Based on this scenario, the living arrangement will change if current demographic trends remain stable, because the older cohort who have a more traditional pattern about the family and household will be replaced by the younger cohort who have the modern family pattern. So the changes are inevitable, and generational differences have a key role in Iran in the future. But what should policymakers do in Iran? The most important point is that the cultural values, such as a positive attitude towards family and high level of familism in Iran. Fertility ideals are more than two children. The universality of marriage is more than 90%. And most young people still believe that the take care of the parents is the duty of the children. Therefore, if young people needs were met, the speed of family change will be slower in the future, but it will not stop. One of these needs is the house. So housing policies is very crucial. Houses built by the government in the past decades in Iran have been small houses, and it's contrary to pronatalist policies that government has undertaken. So housing policies needs to be reviewed in Iran. And also we saw that the single parent and one person household will increase in the future. This means more women will live alone because the population aging and feminization of aging. On the other hand, increase in divorce rate and lower chance for women for remarriage will lead to a rise in lone mother households in Iran. Since the female employment rate in Iran is very low, these women don't have any pension or allowance in the at the old ages. Therefore, the support program that specifically target these households seem necessary. And the final point, the household projection for the next years is necessary for proper planning, and family change must be monitored. In this regard, panel surveys are needed, and unfortunately, we don't have these panel surveys in Iran. Thank you so much for your attention. My presentation is over.
Thank you, Milad, very much, especially for sharing the policy implications as well. Many in our audience could be policymakers who have joined us today, so those are really interesting perspectives. Our first speaker for this session is Geoffrey Abalos, who is from the Asia Research Institute at NUS. Geoffrey, please.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Oops, sorry. Sorry. Good day. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
good.
Okay, thank you. Good day, everyone. My name is Geoffrey Abalos from a postdoc at CFPR. Today, I'll be presenting my paper on analysis of marital transition in the Philippines. This is part of a bigger project that aims to do a household projections in the Philippines using ProFamy. However, due to data and time constraints, I'll be focusing only for this presentation on marital transition rates, which are important inputs in household projections. So just a brief background on marriage in the Philippines. There are two types of marriages in the Philippines. It can take the form of legal marriage or formal marriage, and living together or cohabitation. The majority of marriages in the Philippines are legal or formal marriage, but there is a growing proportion who are living together or cohabitation. One factor for the increase of cohabitation could be the lack of divorce law in the country. The Philippines is the only country in the world where divorce is not legal. Although there are legal means to terminate a marriage in the Philippines, they are costly, and the marital dissolution process takes a very long time. Hence, some people who have previously married live together because they cannot legally marry their current partner. The statistics on cohabitation or living together in the Philippines was first recorded in the 1903 Philippine census. Since then, the absolute number of Filipinos who are cohabiting have increased over time, reaching about 7 million in 2015 census, representing about 7% of the household population. As you've seen earlier, there's an increasing trend of cohabitation in the country. Limiting this trend among women of reproductive age, we see a much more dramatic increase from only about 5% who are cohabiting in 1993 to 18% in 2017. In contrast, the proportion who are legally married has drastically declined from 54% in 1993 to 42% in 2017. Overall, the total proportion who are in union, that is formally married and cohabiting, has remained stable at around 60% from 1993 to 2017. Compared with other Asian countries, the Philippines stands out as having the highest proportion of population who are currently cohabiting, which is around 17%. This is distantly followed by Thailand with around 8%. The proportion in other countries was less than 3%. So why do so many Filipinos cohabit instead of formally marry? Data from the Young Adult and Fertility Study survey shows that economic is the most common reason. This includes both the actual cost of wedding ceremony and other associated costs such as procurement of marriage documents. Other reasons include being too young, around 18%. Legal age at marriage in the Philippines is at 18 years. Filipinos who are underage then cohabit because they cannot legally marry their partner. Legal impediments such as lack of same-sex marriage in the country and, as I mentioned, lack of divorce law also are some of the reasons why Filipinos tend to cohabit than formally marry. So against this backdrop, this paper has two main objectives. The first is to compare trends in marital transition or union formation transition among women in the Philippines across birth cohorts. Second is to investigate the differentials in the transition to first marriage and mean age at first marriage by education and place of residence. So data are drawn from several rounds of the Philippine National Demographic and Health Survey from 2008, 2013, and 2017. DHS, as you know, is a nationally representative survey of, in this case, Filipino women aged 15 to 49. It collected rich information on a host of issues, including marriage or cohabitation. So analysis for this paper is implemented using demo rates, which is a newly developed R software that is part of the ProFamy extended cohort component method package. Our focus for this paper is marital transition or union formation transition. However, the data available in the survey is only the information on age at first cohabitation rather than age at first marriage. So the analysis includes both cohabitation and legal marriage. So bear this in mind. This table shows the calculation of marital transition rates and mean age at transition comparing different birth cohorts of women from 1958 to 2002. It also compares the results from direct calculation and Poisson estimates. The results reveal that there's a close concordance between the two estimates. Results show that overall, marriage in the Philippines is near universal, as more than 90% of women have transitioned to first marriage. The relatively low transition rates in the recent cohort is due to censoring, since most of them are young and haven't been exposed to the risk of getting married or cohabiting. Although marriage is universal in the country, there is a gradual decline in the proportion of women who transition to their first marriage. For instance, transition rates declined from 94% among the oldest cohort to around 92% among 1970s cohort. In the meantime, there is a steady but gradual decline in age at union formation from about 22.8 years among the oldest cohort to 21.5 years among the youngest cohort. In terms of age, we see that age at first marriage or union formation peaks at around 24 years for the two oldest cohort, 1958 and the 1970s cohort. But for the youngest cohort, it peaks much earlier. It's around 21 years. Transition rates for first marriage and age at first marriage also differ by levels of education, as can be seen from this table. Transition rates are generally higher among those with low education compared to those with higher education. For example, transition rates among the 1958 to 1969 cohort with no education was about 98% compared to 91% among those with above secondary education. This education pattern holds across all birth cohorts, but the differentials are much wider among the youngest cohort. Meanwhile, mean age at marriage is positively associated with education. That is, there's an increasing trend towards later marriage among those with higher education. As noted earlier, Filipinos women are entering union at a much younger age, and these patterns sweeps through across all education groups. This one shows age pattern by levels of education across 3 birth cohorts. It shows that the peak of age at marital transition remains the same across the 3 birth cohorts, except among the youngest cohort with above secondary education. Specifically, the peak of transition age among the highly educated group was around 27 years for the two older cohorts, but it was around 23 years among their counterparts in the most recent cohort. Finally, we examine trends of transition rates by levels of by place of residence. As we see, marital transition rates are much higher in urban areas compared to rural areas among the two older cohorts, but this pattern was reversed among the youngest cohort. Meanwhile, age at marriage is much higher in urban compared to rural areas, much higher in rural areas compared to urban areas, but this differential somewhat narrowed among the most recent cohort. Finally, compared with the older cohorts, the urban-rural differences in transition towards marriage among the youngest cohort persists even at older ages, whereas for the two older cohort, it remains much concentrated among the younger ages. So to summarize, we saw that the Philippines still has, the marriage in the Philippines still remains universal, but transition to first marriage has been slowly declining over time. There's also a steady but slow but steady decline in lower age at marriage. And we saw significant differentials by levels of education and place of residence. Next steps for this paper is to use these inputs along with other rates to do a projections of households in the Philippines. And we look forward to sharing these results in other forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoffrey. And finally, may we turn to our final speaker for this session, who is Adam Chung from Hong Kong Baptist University. Adam, over to you, please.
Thank you. Can you hear?
Yes, all good.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitations to for this presentation. My apologies. Originally, I planned to present a paper on the projection study, projection of one-person household in Hong Kong, but I faced some technical issues in getting some key parameters for the model. So I changed the topic of the presentation. So I'm going to present the historical trend and analysis of one-person household in Hong Kong for the last 3 decades using census data, and hopefully I can make some discussions about how the finding can be understood, okay, in the context of projection studies. That would be my next step. Okay, so why study one-person household? I think previous speakers already indicate very clearly that one-person household on a societal level has very strong implications on the consumption patterns. Also, the demands for housing, healthcare, and energy. Actually, it also have implication on measuring social inequalities, because the index for social inequalities, like a Gini index, are calculated based on household level. So when we have more and more one-person household, it definitely have implications on how we measure social inequality. And on individual level, it is also related to behaviors and lifestyle, and many studies have shown that it is also related to mental and physical health. So understanding the trend of one-person household is very important. And what we know in the past study is that usually one-person household is particularly common in highly developed societies. So this chart is showing the percentage of one-person household and comparing the one-person household across different societies with different level of Human Development Index. This data actually come from the IPAM's World Census, and what we see is that the more developed the society is, usually the high percentage of one-person household. And now we look at Hong Kong, and very interestingly, Hong Kong is highly developed societies. But if we compare the percentage of one-person household with other societies, other OECD societies, like in European societies, or even in Japan and Korea, what we know is that the percentage of one-person household in Hong Kong is not as high as other developed societies, and which is puzzling to me. So this is also the motivation why I want to study one-person household in Hong Kong. So just some background about the factors of one-person household. what are the positive factors of driving the trend of one-person household in Hong Kong? Population aging. We have more and more divorce, at the higher and higher divorce rate in the past 3 decades. We also have more and more immigrants in Hong Kong. And we have education expansion, and of course, one-person household is particularly common in urban context. So we in Hong Kong we have a very highly developed urban infrastructure. So these are all positive factors or contributing to the percentage of one-person household in Hong Kong. But in Hong Kong, we also have a weaker social safety net. So if you are single, if you live alone, it is highly unlikely that you can rely on welfare and public housing. So people may tend to stay with their family so that they can get social welfare. And we also have a strong family values in Hong Kong. So unlike other developed societies, people still want to get married as well as stay with their family members. And with Hong Kong, we have a very special housing market. The housing price is very high and the housing size is very, very small. So I think we have a mix of positive and negative factors. So the questions that I want to ask in this study is that how has the socio-demographic profile of one-person household in Hong Kong changed over the years? And how are these variables associated with the living or in one-person household? And more importantly, how is the trend of one-person household in the past in Hong Kong accounted by the changing demographic variables? So what I did is analyzing 5% microdata, census data from 1986, 1996, 2006, and 2016. And in my analysis, I only focus on domestic household only. So I totally exclude institutional household. And what I'm going to do is present you some descriptive statistics as well as some result of the logistic regression and blinded Osaka twofold decomposition analysis. So what we see in the past 3 decades is that we have so first we have population aging. So the mean age of the adult population increased from 40 years old to nearly 48 years old. And we actually have a rapid increase in the divorced population. But so surprisingly, actually, we didn't really have a rapid rise of the single population due to population aging indeed. And we have a very rapid education expansion. So the percentage of percentage of college population going to college increased from 4% to 23%. We also have an increase in immigration. So in 1986, we only have 48% of immigrants. Now in 2016, we have nearly 60% of the population actually born elsewhere. So for the changing proportions of one-person household among the adult population, we have an increase. So we observed the increase from 5% to 8% in the last 3 decades. So now we try to look into the subgroup propensities to live alone in Hong Kong by different variables. So by gender, what we see is that although the observed percentage of one-person household increased from 5 to 8%, if we decompose it into 2 genders, actually the increase in men, increase in one-person household in men population is not that sharp. Okay, so we only have a 6-point-something% to less more than 7-point-something%. So we only have one absolute percentage increase. But for female, the increase in one-person household are actually quite sharp. So from 3% to 7% to 8%. So nearly 2-point-something times, 2.5 times increase. And we also look at the age curve. So it is well known that living alone is particularly common for elderly, and that's true. But if we look at the different years, if we compare the age curve of different years, they are not that dramatically different in the overall adult population. So what we see is that in 1986, we have a gradual rise of the propensity of living alone along the age. Now in 2006, we see a sharp increase in the young adulthood of living alone, but actually it slightly dropped in 2016. So it is not really a linear increase that as time goes by, the propensity of living alone must be increasing, okay, for age-specific groups. So basically, for male, what we see is that the increase in probability of living alone in the young adulthood is obvious for men, but at the age of 30 and after, the trend of living alone actually is quite stable. But for women, the age is a more important factor of living alone. So even after age 30 or 35, the probability of living alone still increase dramatically at the later adulthood. And by marital status, for living alone among the single, widowed, and divorced population, they increased, and especially for the widowed population. And this is also why women increased the percentage of living alone along the years dramatically in the last 3 decades because of widowhood. By education, what we see is that college education is responsible for a higher rate of living alone, but the difference between college and no college are actually the gap between the two education level declines over time. So in 2016, population attended college versus not attended college, the difference is not really significant anymore as the education expansion goes on. And lastly, we look at the nativity. So comparing the locally born population and immigrants. And we see that immigrants are more likely to live alone because some of them migrate to Hong Kong without their families. And local populations, they have their families to rely on. Of course, their probability of living alone is lower, but it's catching up. So local population is the rise of living alone is actually increased more dramatically than the immigrant populations. So I've conducted some logistic regressions. Because of time, let me skip to the decomposition analysis. What I want to show here is that actually the observed difference of a one-person household between years can be attributed by the demographic variables. But how much? This is the question. So from 1986 to 1996, we have 1.2 absolute percentage increase in one-person household in Hong Kong. But what we see is that the demographic variables, age, marital status, sex, immigration, and education only accounted for about 0.6%, so about 50% only. And 50% of the increase is unaccounted by these variables. But what about in 1996 to 2006 and 2006 to 2016? What we see is that the observed difference is 0.0099, so it's a 0.9 absolute percentage and 0.9 again of the absolute percent. And how much accounted by these demographic variables is 1.4 and 1.37%. So actually the demographic variables over accounted. So what does it mean? If other thing being constant, if we only account for the demographic changes in this period, there should have been 1.4% increase in one-person household, but we only observed 0.9. So there is an unexplained part of negative. So if we took the demographic variables constant, actually the propensity of living alone is in decline between 1996 to 2016. So the summary of finding is that in the early period, demographic composition of the population only accounted for 50%, another 50% by the unaccounted factors. Perhaps it's because of the cultural shift to more acceptability of living alone. Maybe it's period of faster economic development without skyrocketing housing price, and maybe it's because of the rapid development of urban infrastructures. But in the later period, since 1996, the demographic composition actually over-accounted the rise of one-person household. So perhaps it is because that of the increasing housing price, it constrained the increase of one-person household, especially the younger adults. They cannot afford to buy apartments. So therefore, even there are more and more divorced populations, there are more and more college population, they could not actually purchase an apartment to live alone. So therefore, it actually constrained the rise, or maybe the rise of individualism is reaching an invisible ceiling. So just because of time, let me jump to the implication for projection studies. What we find in this study is that population aging seems more important than the changing behaviors or education and immigration in predicting the trend of one-person household. So population aging is a very important factor. On top of that, we also see that unobserved factors shape the trend of one-person household other than demographic factors, and that it slowed down the trend in the later period. So the implication for the projection study is that even there are more single, more childless family, more older adults in the future, and it is not necessarily to have them all living alone due to the housing market, and also due to the lower wage of living parental home in the future. And we need to adjust for this factor in the assumption for the projection. That's it for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam, for wrapping up the session, and certainly raising many important insights as well on the topic. May I now open the floor for questions? If you'd like to ask a question to any of our panel speakers, please unmute yourself and speak into the mic. You may also post questions using the Q&A button on the Zoom panel or through the Zoom chat. Anyone with questions?
Sorry, Joe. I would like to say, like, our audience can only post because they cannot speak.
Oh, they cannot unmute themselves.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought it was like a classroom environment. Sorry for that. So here I see some questions coming in through the chat. A very early question, perhaps I can read out the question from Prof. Rico, and that was directed to Prof. Vizina. The question was that how do you capture young people living their parental home who are not getting married or into partnership?
Yes, well, in ProFamy settings, marital transitions and leaving parental home transition as well have their own age, sex specific standard schedules and parameters. So basically we use census and surveys to assess the trend in young people leaving parental home and young people getting into union and partnership. And from that, we assess the parameters and plug that in ProFamy, which deals nicely with that. And so we model basically what's happening and what we see in the data in the projections.
Thank you. There's another question, and the question is directed to Dr. Geoffrey. The question is regarding marital status transition in the Philippines. Is there any possible explanation for increasing urban and rural difference in this cohabitation trend?
One reason could be the migration of young people to urban areas where they are more likely to cohabit compared to rural areas. I think that's one of the possible reasons for this increasing gap between urban and rural residents in terms of cohabitation, migration of young people to urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you. And here is a question for all speakers. Any one of you may choose to answer. How will digitalization, a very important trend, affect your conclusion on the composition of households and living arrangements? Directed to any of the panelists.
Okay, let me try to answer. Like, I'm not an expert of this, but definitely this issue related to elderly living arrangement. With digital elderly care service, I believe many older people could choose to live independently from any company. And that also makes, what Professor Hayashi has emphasized, the distinction between living together and living nearby. I do believe this is the future direction for household projection, to incorporate living nearby in their models. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? There were two that came in, a couple that came in through this Q&A, which is a separate button from the chat under Zoom panel. And I believe our speakers have very kindly addressed some of the question. One question was on migration and immigration policies. So the question was on Canada demographic structure. Does the Canadian government make any policy efforts to balance demographic structure through immigration policies? So clearly quite a broad and interesting question, and you may access Prof. Samuel's reply on the Q&A if you're interested for answers to that. And clearly it's a question that kind of applies to many other countries, including Singapore as well, who focus very much on our immigration policies and which have changed over time. Okay, so I do not see any open questions for this session. So just nice, the clock strikes 12 and it's time for lunch. So thank you very much for joining us in this session. I'll pass the time back to our host, Q Shi.
Thank you very much, Joe.